Tonight, American and South Vietnamese units will attack the headquarters for the entire communist military operation in South Vietnam.
Despite Nixon's promise to end the war, he authorized about 30,000 U.S. troops to enter Cambodia, aiming to disrupt enemy logistics and staging areas that were being used to attack U.S. and South Vietnamese forces.
What's important to understand about America at the time was a lot of quote-unquote like traditional American values and practices were starting to change.
War assembled in the nation's capital.
There were two main perspectives on this decision. On one hand, you had the people who supported Nixon.
An operation to disrupt these enemy supply routes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail while destroying logistical caches inside of Laos.
While on the other, people strongly disliked how Nixon was handling such a large decision.
There is widespread anger and frustration because Nixon appears to be contradicting his campaign promise to bring the Vietnam War to a conclusion.
Nobody likes war, okay, no matter what it is. I was glad to see it winding down in the 70s. There was some animosity about young men going back into Vietnam to fight that war.
Shortly following Nixon's announcement, the side that was against his decision took over across the country, and the anti-war movement as a whole only grew stronger. This was a moment where frustration with the government became impossible to ignore, even as many feared protests would lead to chaos and violence.
I wanted the war to end, okay, because it was just, I saw what was going on there firsthand, and you wanted it to end.
Dissatisfaction in the government had not been something new. During this period, a little under 200 years ago, colonists were upset with how the government was treating them, ultimately declaring independence.
And you really see a similarity to this in a lot of ways with what's happening during the Vietnam War protests, is that you have these members of society that have these grievances, and they don't feel that they're being listened to.
That's what our founding fathers were talking about doing, was finding a way to represent ourselves democratically, and we're not doing it right now, I don't think.
On the days following April 30th, students at Kent State held rallies and demonstrations. They held sit-ins and symbolic funerals. Some even buried a copy of the Constitution because they felt their government was ignoring their voice.
The governor of Ohio, James Rhodes, decides to send the National Guard to Kent in order to keep order. They arrive on campus to discover that student demonstrators have also burned to the ground the ROTC building at Kent State. The point here is that everything is in place for a confrontation which arrives on May 4th.
Right here, National Guardsmen were about 500 feet away from the rally. They then confronted the crowd. Tensions escalated, and then the shots rang out. 4 students were killed, 9 others wounded. The youngest victim was just 19. The students had not started a fight. They were standing for freedom, for accountability, and the right to question authority. In that moment, the ideas written 2 centuries earlier, life, liberty, and the courage to speak truth to power, were tested in the most tragic way.
Any student, a college student, should not deserve to die because of a protest.
This was just one example of these anti-war movements turning violent, but after the tragedy at Kent State, there's a national movement, mostly on college campuses, in direct response to what happened. One of these was at Jackson State.
Well, what happened again is that you had protests against the war. Again, you have the relatively unprovoked and indiscriminate use of gunfire. And again, you have students tragically killed.
Approximately 1 to 2 million students and supporters took to the streets because they were frustrated with how the government was treating ordinary citizens by both sending more to Vietnam and killing them for simply mirroring what the revolutionaries did in 1776 and what is expressed directly in the Declaration of Independence, which were complaints on how the government was treating them. Universities like Kent State, Jackson State, Ohio State, UC Berkeley, and Columbia were continuing America's 250-year tradition dating back to 1776 of challenging authority when it failed to meet the people's expectations.
They had a purpose. They wanted freedom, and they fought for that freedom.
You could define the pursuit of happiness as the right to not have to serve in a war that you strongly oppose and that you believe is immoral.
And if the people believe that something is unjust or unfair, that the government is beholden to the people and so has a duty to respond to that.
How many more American men have to be heaped upon that funeral pyre of war to disprove a theory or a doctrine of military action that has been proven wrong each time that has been acted upon?
The lasting effect of the Declaration of Independence and the protests following Nixon's Cambodian incursion show that freedom demands we challenge those in power and question authority when it is needed most.